welcome to Higher Ed Live, the live weekly web show about the world of higher education, where we're all about digital development and professional empowerment. I am your host, Seth Odell, as always, and I got a special treat for you guys. Tonight's episode, it's in studio. What's going on? I am here with a very good friend of mine, Joseph Maddela, who is, what's your title here at UCLA?
Web developer, I think.
Web developer, we think, at UCLA. Joseph is a good friend of mine for years, been really involved in everything that's going on at UCLA, and tonight we're talking a big topic, which is interactive campus calendars. It's a topic that I think is, for whatever reason, never really gotten the attention it deserves in higher ed. It's something that has a big return on investment. A lot of people aren't doing right, and tonight we're going to break down how to do it right, and exactly what you need and all your options, whether it's in-house, vendor, open source. We're going to cover all of it. And you guys know the drill, but get your questions and comments in right now with the hashtag HigherEdLive. Tonight, as a special, we're going to be showcasing everything you guys got to say. We're going to have a live stream going on, so we're going to frequently pull up any tweets that you have and let you guys know what is up. So, it's HigherEdLive, but first I got to give a very nice thank you to our sponsors who are always awesome for supporting us. First sponsor I got to give a shout out to is Integral. HigherEdLive is sponsored by Integral. They're the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. So be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. That happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to be sending out a tweet in a minute with that link in case you guys are interested in checking it out. Next sponsor, another great group here, OmniUpdate. They're the leading web content management system, CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS OU campus is secure and scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. In fact, it was the highest ranked CMS in customer satisfaction in the 2010 .edu Guru survey. You know EDU Guru is legit. So if you need a CMS, check it out, guys, at omniupdate.com. I'm going to have a link going to that as well. So, we're here in the studio. I'm sending links out to our sponsors. We got a couple people here hanging out. My dog is here. If she pops up at any point, that's just Sophie trying to get a little limelight. So that is a big props to our sponsors. Again, links going out to them in just a second. But we start every week with a little something I call the Weekly 5. 5 stories from around the web that I think are interesting for whatever reason, worth reading, checking out, etc. So the first story going out this week, guys, is a big one. Say goodbye to flip cameras. Cisco has completely killed flip. Flip essentially is not going to exist anymore. It's gone. That's kind of big news for a lot of people in higher ed that are using flip cameras. It's kind of shocking, I think, for a lot of folks. Cisco just invested a lot of money in picking them up a couple years ago. They're still used pretty well. It's pretty worth noting. A lot of folks in higher ed using flip cameras. I don't know, guys. I want to say is one thing is that Cisco's going to blame it on the smartphones. It has nothing to do with that. The product did not evolve. You guys want a product that works, that fits in your pocket. The Kodak ZI-8 is still doing well. It has a microphone jack. It has more features. Flip sadly died due to lack of innovation. The second Weekly 5 going on today is going to be that there's a really great free EDU Live webinar on moving faculty and staff to Google Apps. I've talked previously about Google Apps and why I think it's going to be making a big splash in education, and they are already doing so. So, definitely check out the webinar, and it's worth checking out. It's free. We all like free stuff, guys. Check it out. Next, Weekly 5 is we're in a bubble, and it's not the internet. It's higher education. It's a TechCrunch article that was written by one of the co-founders of PayPal. And it's just something that we all know. I'm sure Mark Greenfield out there knows this. We all know we're in a bubble, but I do think it's worth noting that when the rest of the world notices outside of our industry, it only means that it's probably coming even faster than we think. So it's a great read, really good article, hearing the perspective of someone outside of higher ed and what they think about what's going on. But I'm definitely in agreement, guys. It's coming, and it's definitely unfortunate. So we got more coming from the Weekly 5, though. Yale creates a committee to combat sexual misconduct. So there's been some accusations against Yale about sexual misconduct on campus. And so what do you guys think Yale did? Well, Yale went out and they set up a committee to review sexual misconduct on campus. And then they also made another committee to look at how that committee is doing. You probably think I'm kidding, but I'm actually not. You guys know in higher ed that committees are one of the worst things that can ever happen, but I think this is an example that I wanted to share, not just because it's kind of funny, which it kind of is, but because the truth of the matter is committees aren't just bad for business, they're bad PR too. And Yale looks really, really bad in this story. They look like they got caught, you know, totally unprepared, putting a committee together to tackle a problem that most people are saying has existed for a long time. So I think when you guys have a PR crisis, the last thing you want to do is come out and say, oh yeah, we're setting up a committee to look at it. That doesn't really work, guys, so sorry, I'm not buying it. And last Weekly 5 this week is a really, really interesting story that I found, which was that Libyan rebels Skyped in recently with a Lehigh University class and talked with students. I just think that's a really interesting example of how things are changing with technology in the classroom. We've talked about it before with definitely a lot of guests talking about how technology in the classroom is evolving and changing. But it's not just about Skyping in experts. We're talking about Skyping in rebels in the middle of a major world conflict. That's a pretty big deal, and I thought it was just a really exciting and interesting example of how things are moving forward. I think you guys know Skype has opened Skype in the classroom, and that's evolving. But when you can talk about something changing the world and it's literally happening in your classroom, it's happening as it's going on. I just think that's really exciting. Whatever side you fall on, that's still a pretty amazing historical event. So, that is the Weekly 5. We're going to follow it up with a little something I like to call the unsolicited shout-out of the week, when I shout out any person, place, thing, or idea for any reason I want because, well, it's my show. If you guys want to have your own, you can get your own show, and then you can unsolicit anything you want as well. But until then, it's all me, all unsolicited shout-outs. And this week, unsolicited shout-out going to EDU Tweet-Ups. EDU Tweet-Ups is a brand new brainchild of the one and only Mike Petroff. You might know him. He's a .edu guru. He's just an all-around great guy. This is an awesome site that essentially he tracks all sorts of upcoming conferences, hashtags, Twitter chats, tweet-ups. It's, whatever's going on in higher ed, people getting together to talk about stuff, he's going to be covering it at this site. It's a really, really great resource, and that's why we're shouting it out tonight, guys. Props to Mike Petroff. And if you guys like Mike Petroff, and who doesn't? He's like the most likable guy in higher ed. Well, you guys want to tune in next week, because he's coming in studio to Los Angeles, talking all about welcoming the class of 2015. A lot of times on our show, we have conversations where we talk about one issue, one piece of technology. We're taking a different approach next week. We're going to take the topic of how do you welcome the incoming class of 2015 and break down the best philosophies as well as the best approaches and, when applicable, how technology fits in. Wow, that was a lot of awesome information, right guys? That was great. So, okay, we're about to dive in today. So, first up, Joseph, what's up, man? How's it going?
How's it going? Going great.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. I've been really excited lately about doing more in-studio specials, not only because it means more people are in LA. I mean, Joseph and I live here, but, why not? It's fun, right? It's more exciting. It's like the dignation of higher ed.
And there's free beer, by the way, so that's kind of cool.
Exactly. Free beer at HigherEdLive Studios. Anybody that's been here, just ask Feenan or Kyle or Mark, that is a fact. It's totally free. The sponsors out there, just saying. Let me know. We also got energy drinks, provided thanks to welcometocollege.com. Love those guys too. So, we're talking interactive campus calendars today. It's an interesting topic. It came up recently with some folks in higher ed. They were discussing it, and I just thought it was kind of really an interesting topic that hasn't been discussed that widely. And I was really, really excited to bring it up because I think it's actually a really powerful tool that a lot of campuses, maybe they haven't quite tackled it yet. So, Joseph, as we get into today's show, why don't you just first start off by introducing yourself a little bit and just briefly talking about Happenings, which is UCLA's calendars. That way folks kind of know your perspective as we go through the show today.
Well, I work as a web developer for the University Communications department, and basically we're in charge of marketing and stuff. And Happenings is our social calendar for the entire UCLA community. So what I mean by that is student, staff, and faculty, and just the general community as well. Basically, the way that Happening started was, it's actually two stories here. We had a campus calendar, and it's just your straight-of-the-middle calendar where someone inputs something in, and it didn't really have a target audience. It was just a ton of data that was out there. And what Happening's goal was to surface some of these events that we really wanted to showcase, and really help these people market those events. And you can see that we were actually running two different sites at the time. There was, information was being inputted on the official calendar, and then having us re-input and take those special events that we wanted to curate and market onto happenings. So there was a lot of challenges in doing that, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely are. And that's why I think it's really interesting to talk about it in regards to UCLA, because they've been through the process before, and it's definitely, we're going to talk about why and what they did, because, let's be honest, no one has started with a great campus calendar. I mean, I have had a hard time finding examples of really great interactive campus calendars going back even just more than a couple of years. So this is something where all of us as an industry are kind of in this position where we've had maybe static campus calendars of some kind, and people are moving to make them a little bit more interactive. So, the first question I want to ask, and this is to you guys at home as well, guys, everything we talk about, we're going on here too. So, why is a campus calendar in general so important? And what would the goal be behind it? So I don't know what your thoughts are. I have a couple of my own as well.
Well, at first, when getting into this project with happenings, I didn't really understand that there was really a ton of events happening on campus that weren't being publicized. So there's everything from department meetings, club meetings, something that might be more tailored towards an internal audience, and putting that up online and just having it exist there. If someone's trying to look for something interesting, maybe they're into foreign films or something, and it's just it seems like there's a lot of noise, and so that was one of the main challenges that we had looking at a goal for happenings was, the importance of a calendar is that there's so much information. There's going to be a lot of noise about all sorts of different events. So how do you clear up that noise?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's kind of making a filter and bringing things together, bringing this information out there. I find it, I think it's totally interesting and worth noting that it's these events are already happening, right? I mean, so we're not talking about creating events. That's something that's happening all over campus already. And the events are being created. What we're talking about is elevating them and promoting them. And this is just common ROI, I think. If we're already putting on events, then we want more people to experience them, to go to them. And to me, it's not just an issue of students, but retention is a huge thing. I think that the more you can engage people and get them involved on campus, the better. You guys know in higher ed, the one things you always do when a student comes into campus is you let them know what kind of student groups they have available. Whether you have an open fair or there's a website, you want them to get involved in whatever is interesting to them. And I think it's the same thing with the campus calendars. If these events are happening and people are interested in them, then make sure that they know about it. It's really just about sharing this information so that people can find what's valuable to them. One thing I want to talk about too is the audience of a campus calendar. I mean, I think clearly the audience is largely going to be students. Obviously, that's kind of what we're here for, but this can still go for faculty, staff, community members. I mean, it's safe to say, I think, that with the happening site, you're not just seeing only traffic from students, right? I mean, I would assume anyone involved in the UCLA community would would have interest in finding out information about upcoming events.
Yeah, for example, one of our most frequent contributor to happenings is the Hammer Museum. So they'll put up a lot of their special screenings. They had a whole series on foreign films or foreign animation films. And so we had a lot of people commenting on the Facebook comments through happenings saying like, hey, this is a great event, and they were telling their friends about it. And so you can see that sort of event wasn't just targeted for direct people in UCLA, but it was really just, of course, here in Southern California, we have a large film industry, so there was a lot of people interested in that sort of event.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And guys, I'm seeing all your questions coming in. We're jotting them all down. We are definitely going to be covering all of this stuff. I would say, one question that came in was, why isn't academic calendar info included in the UCLA campus calendar? I would say that's a great question. I personally think there's a big difference between academic calendars and event calendars. I think that they don't need to be integrated necessarily. I think that when it comes to event calendars, it's a broader, your audience isn't the same, and the content isn't the same. So I'm not necessarily sure if it's a one-size-fits-all solution.
And it was a challenge because we got that question when we made that switch. Because essentially what happened was we had to kill off the original campus calendar, which had all that information. So everything from all the dates of first day of registration, last day of registration, vacation days for students, spring break, etc. That was all in that calendar, and what we really wanted to do was filter the events that we wanted to promote, which was really activities, more social sort of settings. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of feedback from people initially saying, "Hey, where's the campus calendar? I just want to figure out, when spring break's going to happen." Mm-hmm. And so we have that link on the right-hand side, but it's definitely a question that you have to ask yourselves when you guys are thinking about creating a calendar, is it something that's going to be based on or concentrated on sports, arts, and lectures? Because we made that the goal for happenings, and you can see that with our navigation at the top. Or is it going to be something where it's really a wider appeal, where it has those sort of administrative things included?
Very interesting. So, guys, we've got a lot of great questions coming in, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. We were going to talk in a bit more detail about some other things, but we're going to knock these questions out, because this is your show, and that's why we're here. So, question for you, Joseph, coming in. Does UCLA distinguish between public events and campus-only UCLA student events? This is a good question, because there's a lot of times, there's a couple things in higher ed, as you guys know. There's events that are either campus-only, or events that they want campus-only, but are technically public, and then there's public events where you want everyone to come. So do you guys have a restriction? Do you guys put events up for everything or just for public events?
That's a really good question, because that comes up all the time when we have events like Spring Sing, the art party, where it's really just, you have to be a UCLA student to get in. It's tough because I've seen it go both ways. I've seen some events for us where we've listed it, but in the description for the event we specifically put, you must be a UCLA student to enter. And there's some other events that we've kept off of happenings purposely because of, from what I've heard, it was due to some sort of like fire codes, or they didn't want to attract a large audience where we know we have to turn people away. So I think you have to, and I think we're going to get into more details about the pitfalls of creating your own calendar, running your own calendar, but that's really a question between you, the calendar operators, facilities, emergency management, I think even gets into it, or something. Parking. So there's a ton of different players in this. So
yeah, and that's the one thing to keep in mind, guys, that it gets really sticky. That it does get really sticky when you start to think about events that are publicly online, when it's going to impact how many police officers are involved, and what parking is involved, and a lot of times that doesn't matter if you're talking about a small time event. But there are large events that when you put it up, it brings a lot of big questions and it raises a lot of red flags. So guys, we are going to keep talking about this. I just want to dive right into it, since we're already talking about it, people are interested in it. There's 3 ways you can handle a campus calendar, essentially, if you want to do one. You can do it entirely in-house, you can use an open source platform and start from there, or you can go out to a vendor. So UCLA went the route that it was in-house, and so we're going to talk about doing it in-house, and we're going to go through the way that Joseph and his team, and they all put it together, and we're going to talk about the pitfalls of that, the pros, the cons, and then from there we're going to look at the other solutions, because again, nothing is a solution for every campus. It obviously shifts. So, just starting off, what was the decision? Were you around when the decision was made, and why was it decided to do it entirely in-house?
Yeah, basically, I talked about it a little bit earlier, how happenings, you consider that a little bit more on the marketing side, and the campus calendar was more on setting up all the logistics for actually executing that event, right? So we're talking about reserving this space, whether it's a room, stadium or arena or whatever it is, getting all the parking information sorted out, contacting the event organizers and getting all that stuff. So basically what we wanted to do with happenings, or the original site, I guess you can call it the 1.0 version, what we were doing was manually re-entering things that were already on the calendar system. Okay.
Well,
so
yeah, that had to be a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we had, I think, like 2 student assistants, and we had Ann Butler. She's our director, and they were sorting through all that information, entering things in by hand. So we had 2 different systems not talking to each other, right? And so basically, what we approached Campus Calendar and we said, events online, and they're the people that run the calendar, and we said, hey, we would love it if we can get direct access to your data, so we can help you market them. And they said, we would love it if you guys had access to our data, because then all we would do is concentrate on entering in the information. And that's how the collaboration of happenings has become. And you can see that there's really a fine line, or actually there's a clear distinction between the 2. Happenings is more of a front end. It's a visual way for us to show or be able to surface those events that are entered in with a bunch of other calendar or a bunch of other events happening on campus. And events online, which enters in all the data, is strictly responsible for getting the data getting the event information, make sure that it's accurate, and contacting and communicating with all the different players, like I said, that's going to be involved with putting an event together.
Great. So, before we dive into a little bit more about the back end, which I want to hear about, great question from Mark saying, is there a difference between a calendar of critical dates and an events calendar? Should you differentiate? My personal thought is yes. I mean, whether or not it's one calendar technically, how it's built, I think it's up in the air, but I think there needs to be a way to filter that. They need to appear publicly as separate things. I still think that, the events on when spring break is and class schedules shouldn't be on the front of just your events calendar, because your events calendar is more than just student focused. While that's the majority of it, I think there needs to be a way where whether you can filter and click, it can all be on the same portal sort of, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be presented publicly the exact same way.
Basically, the campus calendar is a pool of events, and in our back end, we can select which events we would like to appear on happenings.
Now, talk to me a little bit more about the back end. I mean, how is this actually put together?
Okay, so the back end, we didn't want to rebuild the system altogether. We program we're in a LAMP environment, so we do PHP, MySQL, we're on Apache, and the calendar system is actually running on ASP, so they're a Microsoft shop, right? So that was one of the first big challenge. We were like, are we going to have to learn your language, or are you going to have to learn ours? And we said, forget that. We're going to use something called a web service. And a web service, just to kind of sum it up, it allows you to consume data without having to learn that other person's language, right? So you're able to read that person's data through a common format like XML. Okay, so these are just sort of like buzzwords that you might hear, okay? But XML is great because what Campus Calendar is able to do is continue with their operations, continue programming in ASP. They were working with an outside vendor to help develop their system. And what we were able to do was continue programming in our language and in our workflow and just consume that data. So at its simplest, we write up a little code to talk to their server that says, give us all of the events for April. And it would just return us an XML file. And then we would just reformat it. So that's what you would actually see on happening. So the logic is written on their side, and the view part of what people actually interact with and search is done by us.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, I want to get into the topic that I think is really the most important part of today's show, which is the fact that these calendars now have the ability to be actually interactive. So, okay, we talk about, you have a calendar online. It says what's going on campus. That's great. Is this just a promotional tool? Is it static or not? And I think the beauty is that nowadays it doesn't have to be. That you can have a truly interactive experience, and you can pull in a lot of awesome social components that can make it really cool. And I think that's one of the things that I love about happenings is that it's kind of like your playground. You guys experiment a lot with stuff. Now, we've talked about it before briefly, I think back in like episode 5, Joseph was on the show, old school HigherEdLive. But I want to talk more about it. Tell me about the social components, because I think at the end of the day, guys, if you just have a calendar that's just static with information, you're kind of missing the point. There's some things that you can do that are relatively easy that can make this stuff really fun and engaging for folks. So, what are some of the things that you guys do with happenings that make it easier for folks to share the information, to like it? Where do we even start with that?
Well, first, our biggest referral is actually from the UCLA Gateway. So if you go to ucla.edu, you'll see 4 events that we've actually handpicked to appear on the right-hand side of the page. So that's our number one main traffic source. Our second thing that we started looking at was, how can we actually get people to easily share the events that they're going to attend, right? Or something that they're just interested in. And so we looked at a bunch of different things. At first we actually started with like the dig button, so people can dig an event, right? We incorporated a link, I think, to a bunch of other like social bookmarking sites. But we really needed something that we can see immediate results from. And at the time when we were tossing this idea around, Facebook or F8 was going on, so they were announcing all these different tools that Facebook was going to come out with. So the like button in I think like a revamped comments widget was being developed. And so we took a look at it and we said, wow, this is great. It's only going to take us like a few minutes to implement, and we can leverage the power of people's friends, right? So if you were to like something, maybe like a concert that's going on campus, and you say like, that appears on your wall, and all of a sudden it says, Seth likes this concert going on at UCLA happenings. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting really good exposures that way. The comment system, we found really cool too, because we started noticing a behavior from our users. They were using it as a way to check in to events, and we didn't really intend for them to use it, but we started seeing this cool thing where people would say like, oh great, I'm going to be there at this event. And their friends would see that comment, and they would start, they would also say like, hey, I'll meet you at the event, or I'm going to start at that event as well. So
interesting.
That was pretty cool.
That's a good point. I mean, I saw that happen too. That people were using it as a way to RSVP with their friends, essentially. So there's a couple things in there I think they're important to know. I think one thing is, I mean, like Facebook Connect with calendars to me just makes sense. Especially, I think a lot of you guys already know this, but Facebook has changed the settings when you like a story online. When you like something now, they're not just publishing the link anymore. They're actually publishing the link with like 3 lines, essentially like a couple sentences now. So it appears in all of your friends' news feeds as a news item, essentially, with more information. So if I was to like an event at UCLA, several months ago it might have just said, I like this event at UCLA Hammer. Now it's going to say, Seth likes this event at UCLA Hammer, and have all the first initial information available. So I mean, talking about getting more and more real estate on Facebook. As you guys know, especially with college students who, again, are probably, I'm sure, the focus of any campus calendar, you're talking about them sharing it with their friends. That's going to clearly increase promotion. But I want to talk a little bit about the future, because I see a lot of interesting stuff when you talk about people checking in with the comments, because I think that there's a big issue with checking in, and how does this relate? The fact that Facebook is promoting Facebook Places now, that now you can check into an event at an event's place on Facebook. Things are just kind of getting interesting. So where do you guys see things going? I mean, are you planning to keep experimenting with it?
Well, we actually just started. We just launched on Foursquare. So Nate, right?
Yeah, our camera Robert and Nate here. He's been big involved at UCLA on Foursquare. Got to give him a shout out. So. And
so we're starting to look at what we can do with Foursquare and be able to promote some of these events. One of the challenges, one of the problems that we're having right now is actually, people check into events that they're actually at, and with the calendar, you're more thinking of like you're going to attend this event in the future. So how do you actually do that? And if the audience member has any suggestions, we'd love to hear about it, because that's sort of like what we're trying to tackle right now is how do you utilize that check-in system for future events, right? Because the other problem is, once an event's happened, it really just sort of drops off in the calendar. It still exists. You can still look it up, but you sort of have to use the calendar back button and go to the to a past date, and that doesn't really help if an event's already passed.
Yeah.
That's sort of the problem that we're trying to tackle right now.
Yeah, checking in, guys. If you have any questions or thoughts out there, I want to hear them right now. How does checking in incorporate into what's going on here with these campus events and calendars? Is it too much to try and incorporate anything else like Foursquare or any other events? I think if anything, Facebook Places might actually make the most sense. But I mean, at this point, we don't need to necessarily be industry leaders. This is something that could evolve on its own. Really great question from Mark coming about, how can PlanCast fit in on this? If you guys haven't used PlanCast before, it's a really cool event feature where essentially you put an event that's coming up in the future and people sort of RSVP for it online. You get information, something HigherEdLive has used in the past. The problem with any of these things, though, compared to Facebook, I think, is just the user base. How many of your students are actually using PlanCast, and how many of them will use it if the feature's available but they don't know about it? I think one of the reasons why you're talking about so many students leaving comments on an event saying, I'll be there, I'll go, is not just because there's a desire to tell people you're going to be there, but 2, it's on a platform that they're comfortable with. So it's not out of their realm. That's one of the big things I see as an issue with big projects that are based around location like Foursquare or anything else, that if people haven't used it, I mean, what percentage of your campus base is using it? To offer exclusively the ability to check in via Foursquare and leave everyone else out, it's kind of iffy. That's kind of why I always lean towards Facebook, just for the user base. I think it's a really interesting option. But I don't know, maybe you don't need it. I think, going back to what you guys talked about at first, though, is so necessary. I think allowing basic comments, allowing people to like something, to share something. I mean, you'd be surprised. I looked through a lot of campus calendars going up to today's event, and there's a lot that don't have ability to share. Now, that to me just seems like you're missing out on a great opportunity. To turn, again, people that are going to attend an event to your own promoters so they can share their friends. And I think, and nowadays it's really easy to put a lot of sharing options in. So I think, if nothing else, that's kind of a good place to start.
Yeah, we like the actual event pages as well that act as tools for the event promoters, so they can go back on that page and interact with their potential customers or whoever's going to be visiting that event. So people might have questions about parking, and they'll post it on that comments page, right, or on the comments box. And if you're in charge of that event, you would just go back to the happenings page and interact directly with your constituent.
Now, there's one thing I want to say that I've been talking about Facebook events for a while, actually with Nate, our camera operator. I remember talking to him about 2 years ago about how he and his friends used Facebook events for stuff that they had going on. And how, right now, UCLA doesn't set up Facebook events for each event. Why? Because we have a really great interactive calendar. Except other people are creating them for you. And this is not a problem exclusive to UCLA. I want everyone to know this. This is one of the big things I want to say today, is that you better go look, because if you're not putting your events on Facebook, your students are. And they're not updating the information when your event changes location or time or anything else. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and put every event on Facebook, because I'm not sure that's the solution. But the scary truth is, right now, your events are on Facebook. The information is wrong, and no one is updating it. And I don't have a solution to that problem. I cannot think of one. Because there's no way that you can have a campus calendar and then go and put every event on Facebook and then go manually update them. To me, it just seems very dangerous, very time-consuming. But at some point, the reality is students are creating these events, and they're probably not updating because they're not the ones that are organizing it. And that to me is kind of a spooky thing.
Something I did notice was that I think when the amount of likes exceed a certain number on a certain event, it automatically creates an event page for it. And I don't know if this is still true or not, because Facebook seems to be always changing these things like from month to month. So that's what I was noticing. So when we get certain traction for a certain event where it'll have more than 10 likes and it automatically creates a page, I'll go on there and just check if there's any conversations happening on that page. And if there's any date changes, for example, I'll go ahead and post it on that page as well as on the happenings page. So it does happen, but that sort of functionality built into the like button sort of helps a little bit. But it is yet another page for you to manage.
Yeah, and another thing you manually have to do.
Yeah.
And that brings up, there's a question right now in the tweet stream, which is, does the Facebook API allow you to create or update events? I don't know the answer to that, but I have not heard of it being able to do so. I mean, do you know if that's something that's possible?
You know what? I'm not sure, because their API for some of their newer widgets have been sort of confusing. It's been changing. Sometimes they'll say this method is deprecated and you can't use it anymore. So I'm not sure. I think you're gonna have to check the Facebook.
If anybody out there has an idea, let us know. It's a good question.
Yeah.
One more note on happenings before we move on to some other options, and this is that one of the key features of the happenings calendar is that you guys filter the events and feature one each day as like an upcoming event. And this is something that Mark talked about earlier. What do you do when your campus has 100 events a day? And that totally happens, especially a place like UCLA as well. We have 65,000 people on campus a day. We have a lot of stuff going on. One of the things I love about happenings is that you guys feature an event. Each day, you pull up a specific event, so you have your page, and then you say, here's the events that we selected as being like the top events today for you to go to. And I think it's a great thing because you're doing the hard work for people. They don't have to go through the 70 events today. You guys are doing it for them. So there was a question that came through earlier, which is just how do you guys do that? Who's the editorial decision makers behind happenings? Are there rules, restrictions, or are you guys just kind of arbitrarily saying what's awesome?
Well, first I have to go back to the first version of happenings, because the original concept was it would be something like Dig, right? So the more times an event was viewed, the more it would surface to the top and it would get promoted to that that certain feature. And it was really cool. But we started playing game theory, and we were like, okay, how do you actually game the system? And we figured out, well, it was a pretty simple system. We would check your IP address, and someone could theoretically game the system and promote their event, right? We moved away from that. We moved over to more curated system, where now we're actually handpicking these events. Yes, we do handpick the events. It's either there's 3 of us working on the happening site directly, and then there's I think 2 or 3 other people working on the back end on the actual calendar information. So once in a while we'll get emails directly from people asking if they could be placed on the features.
Yeah, and I will I can say Mark here has a great comment that deciding what events get featured on the homepage is a political landmine. Which I think is definitely true.
Yeah, because once in a while I'll get emails and I'm like, I'm just a programmer, man. I can't help you.
That's good. Deniability is key, guys. Deniability. It's not my call. Always have that. So, guys, that's happenings, and that's one example of an in-house solution. And we're going to talk about the work that's involved. But you just heard, if there's up to 3 people that are involved in some capacity with happenings, your campus may not have that kind of resources available, and there are some really good vendor solutions out there. Well, a couple. A lot of bad vendor solutions, too. So I want us to cover as well some of the vendor options, just so you guys know exactly what when you're facing, I want to redo our calendar, you know what to do, whether it's in-house, vendor solution, open source, which is a pretty cool option. So I want to talk a little bit about what your options are to do it essentially off of not doing it entirely in-house. And one example of that, I'm just going to show you one example here with Emory, is this is a Trumba TRUMBA. It's a calendar system that several universities are using, some other big organizations. It looks okay. I mean, to me, from what I've seen from all of their calendars, it's pretty static. It doesn't include images, and I'm a stickler for thinking that people like things that look good. And I just think that it's an example of one that works, but it's not necessarily feature-rich. So that's Trumba. There's a couple others. There's one called Calendar Express. If you guys are experienced with Calendar Express or know people that use it, let me know. I'm not very familiar. I mean, I checked out their site. It was okay. Another one is R25, which is actually, or R25. It's a calendar system that people use to reserve rooms. It's not supposed to be the front public-facing calendar, but there are some schools using it for that. I wouldn't recommend it. And then there's one vendor, I can really say that, I mean, Trumba was okay. It was not bad looking. There's only one vendor that I thought kind of really got campus calendars and made them look cool. And I do have to give just a plug to them, because again, I think they're doing the best job if you want to go the vendor route. And I just think that is Localist. So Localist is, I just think Localist is a pretty cool service. I'm going to show you a couple examples of what they've done. They handle Cornell's. They also handle Johns Hopkins. These are just a couple examples of the calendars they put together. Now, again, when you compare this to Trumba, if you're looking to do a vendor solution, I guess got to say that you're talking about static with a list that the information is there, and they're talking about like making the information attractive. And I do say when I looked at Localist, Joseph, I thought it looked somewhat similar to Happening. So I think that if you're looking for a vendor solution, I haven't worked with them. I don't know if they're easy, if they're cheap, or what, but I do think the final product, out of all the vendors in higher ed that offer calendar solutions, it looks the best.
I think I agree as well. But I think from the programmer standpoint, the first thing that I would ask is, how portable is the data here? So Localist goes out of business. Who has access to the data? Can you export it somehow so you can, reuse it, reuse that same data again somewhere else? Mm-hmm. How easy is it to write new code for it? Do you need to learn like some sort of language some proprietary language that vendors come up with? If you remember Facebook markup language, FMPL, like you had to learn that. So those are the types of questions, or how do you input the data in? So we haven't seen the back end. All we've seen is the front end on Localist, and it looks great, but how does it actually work in the back end? I think those are the big questions. Yeah,
and that's a question that you face every time when you look for vendor solutions. It's just it's what do you want to do, right? Do you want to go with a vendor or not? I think if you're going to look to do a vendor, I think Localist is the only one I could say that from the front end I'd recommend. But Joseph said there's always a lot of stipulations when you work with someone. Do you want to put this information out there or not? Especially, again, are you working with private events? Is this information sensitive or not? A lot of questions. But that's the vendor solutions. I think that it's definitely a model that people can do if they need to or if they want to. But they don't have to. There's other options. So if doing it in-house seems maybe a little bit overwhelming to you, there are some open source solutions that you can kind of have a really great place to start from. So I think that's really important to talk about those as well. So there's a couple interesting examples of open source solutions that you can try out. The first one that I want to talk about is, I don't know much about it, guys. I'm looking for you guys. It's Bedework. It's BEDEWORK, and I know that RPI is using it. I think that Duke is using a few others. Some folks are sending some links in. Again, check out the tweet stream. Some really great examples coming in on people using the calendar. But Bedework is one open source solution that does appear to be available for folks to use. So it's good to keep in mind that that's an option for you. The other one that I thought that was really interesting is an open source solution is the one that's from UNL, University of Nebraska Lincoln. So they have an open source solution. We're going to send a link out to this that you can totally start and use this from. And it just seems like a really interesting way to start. So, Joseph, what are your thoughts about trying to use something like UNL's event publisher for a school? Is this something that, you checked it out a little bit. Does it look like something that some folks could use to start with if they're maybe limited on time or resources and are comfortable with it?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I noticed with that package is that it's hosted on Google code sharing platform. So that's already a good sign for me, because I know that there's going to be a community where if the company or whoever your private vendor would have been goes bankrupt and disappears, that code is going to exist somewhere. So there's a community building on top of it. If you have problems customizing the code, or just have general questions, You can ask it directly on Google Code. I think that was it,
Mm-hmm.
where it was hosted. Or the project might be hosted on GitHub or something. That's another place where you might hear of. But yeah, I mean, front end wise, it looked like it was a great solution. Like I said, I haven't really explored the back end to see how it looks, but from what I read, it looks like they're LAMP based, so you can do PHP 5, MySQL, but I think they also had an ASP version. But that I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, I think it's just, I guess when it comes to this, like campus event calendars, like anything in higher ed, I think it's going to come down to resources. I mean, the more resources you can put towards this, the better it's going to look. I mean, I should note, obviously, when we say 3 people at UCLA are involved in this is not their full-time job by any means. This is a project that 3 people are involved in, but maybe it would be good to share, combining the 3 of you, like, or let's start with you. How much of your time do you think you spend, like, a week or a day, percentage-wise, on happening specifically?
Well, when we're actually rolling out new features on this site, it may take a few hours depending on our workload. But as far as daily stuff, we do run a Twitter page where we occasionally will try to promote an event, and we also run a Facebook page as well. And I pretty much go on there, once a day to just check out if people have any comments or questions about certain events. But it's like something that I check at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, and follow people, trying to get publicity for it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. It's something that, while it takes a lot of time when you're building it, once it's built, it's not like you're spending all day.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, the people at EOL, they're the ones doing all the hard work, because they actually have to do, like I said, do all that back-end stuff, like making sausage, right? Like, we don't know how it's made. We have the easy part on happens. We just show it and it's done. But those guys, I mean, I have to give it up to them, because they have to, work with the police to make sure that they have, all that other jazz. Like, I don't want to get into.
Campus calendars are like sausage. You heard it here first. No, I agree. I gotta say this. Like, I spent a lot of time looking through higher ed campus calendars. A lot of time. And I will tell you that at the end of the day, and there's 2 things to me about campus calendars that you need to think about. The first one is, how much work is it going to take on your end? Because just managing campus events in general is incredibly time-consuming. So even if you go with a vendor solution or anything else, someone has to put the data in. The data has to come from somewhere. It has to come from every club, every organization, every department, and be funneled somewhere. And whether you're going to have something where it's just a database system, people are just filling out a field, or whether you're taking the information via email or some other way, there's work involved. So clearly, find a way to make it as easy as possible. But the other thing I got to say is, and again, this is coming from someone who does marketing, so this is probably why I'm saying this. Like, what matters to me the most is the experience for the user. I mean, yes, I understand that there's a lot of work behind it, but like, when I'm looking at calendars, and I spent the last 3 weeks looking through campus calendars in higher ed, I looked for what was the most interesting, attractive to me, had sharing features, what made it for me as a user something I would actually bother to return to. Because if it's just a list, you're going to come like once a month when you want to make sure the timing of an event is at a certain time of day or time. But what you guys do with Happenings is you're trying to create a place that people go to just to see what's going on. So they're going with a question, not with a specific question like, what time does this event start, but what can I do this Friday? Or I'm bored and it's a Tuesday night. I mean, essentially what you're trying to do with the calendar is say, you're not bored. You can never be bored. There's always something going on. And so to me, when I looked at that, I got to say, I loved, obviously, UCLA's. Clearly, I'm a little biased, but Wayne State had a great one in-house. Florida International University, Matt Herzberger, they just launched one last week. Some of these I thought were really nice looking, and I will say some of them, again, the localist ones, I thought were actually quite attractive for folks that were interested in checking it out on a user level. I just think that to me there's some features that are needed. So the big question is, regardless of how you build it, my question I'm going to ask you guys at home, and I'm going to ask you, Joseph, is what are the necessary features? Beyond just all events, here's what I think you guys need to do. Every calendar needs to be able to be filtered. It needs to be, whether it's by interest of topic, by department, there has to be some sort of filter system so someone can go and navigate through the hundreds of events that are happening, and they're actually going to be there. They have to be able to filter through that, I think. 2, it needs to be able to share the information. The technology is available now. You have to be able to somehow click a button and share it. I love the comments idea, but I don't know if that's necessary. I just think that it needs images, and it needs to have an editorial voice. I mean, when you look at some of these calendars, and again, I'm not knocking anybody in particular at all, but when you look at a calendar that simply lists the events, yes, that's a resource, but you're not helping me really. You're not making my life any easier besides just providing me information in a logical format. I like the idea of calendars that decide things for you. Here are the top events, or here's the top sporting event, or the top art event. I think it's worth it on a higher ed level for someone to use their editorial voice to at least assist people in filtering. Because let's be honest, guys, we put on some janky events. I'll say it. We put on events that have 10 people in the crowd, and it's a very tiny little lecture, and it's interesting to like 5 people, and the other 5 were told by their boss, you better go and make sure it looks like there's people in the audience, right? But we also put on amazing world-class events. When the Dalai Lama is coming to UCLA in 3 weeks, that better be the featured event, I would hope, right? Like,
I think, yeah,
those would be kind of events that, like, rise to the level that you want to let people know. And I think that's why one of the biggest things I say is there needs to be an editorial voice.
Yeah, the editorial voice. I mean, there's always a debate of whether you crowdsource this stuff, right? Do you build a system that allows crowdsourcing of events, doing like a dig style model, or do you curate it? I think there's maybe room for both.
Yeah, I think so too. And Patrick Powers came in late. First off, shame on you, man. He asked if I mentioned Lafayette College, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but if I didn't, right here, Lafayette College. This is a calendar they built in Drupal, which is worth mentioning too, because Drupal is something I think is expanding more in higher ed. Drupal's what's behind whitehouse.gov. I use it personally at UCLA School of Public Affairs, so interesting to know. I think the calendar looks really great. The question came in from Nick, did I have a favorite calendar? I don't want to go ahead and say I had a specific favorite one. I do have a very soft spot for happenings, but I would give Nick a shout out. I thought that there's a couple key ones. Let me pull up, sorry. I thought, Wayne State's really good. FIU's new one was really great, but I also really liked a couple of the offerings from Localist a lot. So I think that it's not that I had one favorite or the other, but it's just finding those features that are really, going to pay off and make someone's life easier, make them get out of their house and go experience some stuff. So, I mean, I think the question, though, too, is I feel like where are we in the realm of campus calendars? We're at the beginning of something. I feel like right now campus calendars are still very static. We're finding a few things, but, I mean, it's going to grow. You guys know the overly hyped app, maybe you've heard of it, Color, which raised like $42 million, but it's the idea of sharing photos at an event, at the same time, or sharing photos of people around you in your vicinity. At the same time, last week, Posterous, a great blogging platform, I love Posterous, they launched a new feature on their app where you can share one email, give it out to everyone that has the Posterous app, and they can send event photos to one account. So at commencement this year, you could have everyone use the Posterous app, take their own photos and send it in. I think ultimately, the campus calendar is going to be more than just a calendar. It's going to be a homepage and a portal to event experiences, and where you can collect photos. Because one of the big things with every campus calendar that I've found is the event. Once the event happens, the function of the campus calendar is sort of obsolete. And that's, I mean, yes, the events will stay up, but the question is, like, after the event, where do you put the recap if there's an article, or videos if it happened, or where do you put the photos? There still is no place that I've seen on any school's website where there's a real adequate landing site for events both before and after they happen. And that's not something exclusive to higher ed. I think that's the web in general. Events are a very interesting thing. That you have a lot of things like Plancast beforehand, or you have Facebook events beforehand, but Facebook events, as you know, after like 6 months they disappear. You can't find them really. There's this interesting kind of dynamic going on right now that I think in 5 years is going to have totally played out and be really, really cool.
Definitely, I think it's turning more social, and we were griping with the same challenge once again. We were talking about somehow integrating Flickr and doing a dynamic, slideshow, encouraging people to take photos with their cell phones at the event. But we were still thinking, who comes back to this page after the event's over?
Yeah.
So we're still sort of grappling with that. I think there's some events that happen annually that might be able to use that. Something like Spring Sync, for example. But we're still looking at it, and we're exploring ways to sort of grow that from being a single day event or a single page, and making that live throughout, maybe for the next year or something.
So, guys, that's pretty much going to wrap up where we're at talking about campus calendars today. I don't think, I think as you guys learn with any of our discussions, they're always so open-ended. There isn't any one solution. I mean, if I had to give my final takeaways, I would say try to do this in-house, because I think if you do go with a vendor or even something open source, you're going to be customizing so much of it anyway that maybe you start on your own. But ultimately what's going to make that decision for you is probably politics. Where is the information? Can you get access to it or not? It goes back to web strategy. Ultimately, make a strategy and then decide how you can implement it. But I would also say, I don't think it matters how you build it, as long as it's there, as long as it works for your audience. But I just think that At the end of the day, the biggest takeaway to me is that if your campus calendar is just a static list of events, you're missing a key opportunity to encourage engagement and to get people involved in your campus. Ultimately, the more people are involved, the more they care. And that will play out on a long, long scope of ways. Play a lot of different ways with someone that stays in school, likes your school more, has more friends, is more social. I just think the payoff for a really interactive campus event is more than just someone attending one more event. It has the potential to be pretty huge. So any last thoughts for you, Joseph, you want folks to take away on campus events?
If you're going to think about an in-house solution, please talk to people. So talk to the people that own the data, whoever's inputting it. Talk to other programmers on campus. And figure out, talk to maps, talk to shuttles, people in charge of the shuttle schedule. Talk to parking, and get different apps talking to each other. That way you can build something that's really robust and full-featured.
Absolutely. All right, so guys, I got to give a shout out, as always, again, to our wonderful sponsors that make HigherEdLive happen. I can't thank them enough. HigherEdLive is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're sending out a tweet with that link momentarily. Another big shout out, got to go out to Omni Update, wonderful sponsors of HigherEdLive. They're the leading web content management system, CMS, provider for higher education. The company's web CMS OU campus is secure and scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. In fact, it was the highest ranked CMS in customer satisfaction in 2010 .edu Guru survey. So if you guys need a CMS, check out the coolest cats in town. I love them over at Omni Update. Wonderful, wonderful people. So, guys, this has been HigherEdLive, HigherEdLive.com. As all archived episodes, we have a newsletter going on. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the tweet stream. I love being able to pull up what you guys have to say. I really, really do. I think you guys make this show. Your dialogue makes this show. I hope in some small way we're a resource to you, but you guys are absolutely a resource to us as well. So, my sincerest of thanks for you guys watching, and please don't forget another in-studio special next week. How do we do it? Everybody wants to come to LA when it's beautiful out, I guess. And we're going to be back next week with some guy named Mike Petrov. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's pretty awesome. He's a good guy. .edu Guru. You know Mike Petrov. We're talking about welcoming the class of 2015, a big pie in the sky and on-the-ground conversation. It's going to be exciting. I hope that you guys check it out. All right, everybody. Take care.